My name is Sienna Blake. I am 31 years old, and in the high-stakes, humidity-soaked world of Austin, Texas, I am the woman who manufactures perfection. If you have ever scrolled through a luxury bridal blog and felt a pang of envy over a white-tented gala in the Hamptons or a candle-lit cathedral ceremony in New Orleans, you have likely seen my handiwork. I am a wedding planner, but I don't just pick out tablecloths and taste-test buttercream. I am an architect of expectations, a logistical general, and a high-priced emotional buffer. I spent 12 years climbing from a frantic intern with blisters on her heels and a trunk full of emergency sewing kits to a woman who has been featured 3 times in Martha Stewart weddings. My starting rate is $15,000, and that is before I even pick up a phone to call a florist or scout a venue. People pay for my taste, yes, but they stay for my ice water in the veins composure. I can handle a drunken best man, a sudden Category 4 thunderstorm, or a 5-tier cake collapse without smudging my eyeliner or raising my voice. My studio in downtown Austin is my sanctuary. It smells of expensive stationery, bergamot candles, and success. The walls are lined with framed magazine covers and thank you notes from celebrity clients and tech moguls. In this room, I am a queen. I am respected. I am a professional whose time is billed in 6-minute increments because my expertise is that valuable. I have built a network of vendors, photographers, caterers, musicians, and vintners who don't just work for me, they believe in me. I've saved their businesses during slow seasons, and I've referred them to the kind of old money clients that keep them in business for a decade. In the wedding industry, social capital is the only currency that matters more than cash, and my bank account is overflowing. On a Tuesday afternoon in July, I was sitting at my glass desk, analyzing a silk ribbon swatch for a winter wedding, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Mom." A small, familiar knot formed in my stomach. In my family, a phone call from my mother rarely meant a check-in on my well-being. It usually meant a request that sounded like a suggestion, but carried the weight of a command. "Sienna, darling," she started, her voice already carrying that specific, fluttering vibrato she used when she was about to ask for a small favor. "We have the most wonderful news. Claire and Marcus finally set a date. It's going to be Tuscany. A vineyard wedding, 3 days of events, 150 guests. It's the wedding of the century for our family." "That's amazing, Mom," I said, leaning back in my leather chair, genuinely trying to be happy for my younger sister. Claire was 26, a girl who viewed life as a series of photo opportunities. Marcus was a wealthy investment banker whose family belonged to 3 different country clubs. Claire must be over the moon. Tuscany in the spring is breathtaking. "It is, and Marcus's family, oh, Sienna, they are so well connected. They're expecting something truly magnificent," she continued. I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. Then the pivot came, the one I should have seen coming from a mile away. "So, obviously, we need you to handle it, help out the family. Since you're so good at this, it won't take you any time at all." I paused. My pen hovered over a contract for a tech CEO's daughter, a contract worth $20,000 in management fees alone. "Help out. Mom, a destination wedding in Italy for 150 people isn't a help out situation. It's a full-time logistical nightmare for 6 months. I'd have to fly out there at least 3 times for site visits, handle international import laws for the decor, and manage a local staff that might not even speak English fluently." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Sienna," my mother laughed, though the sound was brittle and sharp. "You're her sister. You can't expect your own flesh and blood to pay those ridiculous Austin rates. You'd really charge your own sister, after all we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me lately, Mom?" The words were out before I could stop them. "Don't be ungrateful," she snapped. "We're doing our part. Your father and I just wired Claire $50,000 as a cash gift for her and Marcus to start their life together. We want her to have a cushion. We've already spent our entire budget on that gift, so we're counting on you to provide the labor of love. It's the least you can do to ensure this family makes a good impression on Marcus's parents." The air in my studio suddenly felt freezing. $50,000. My mind flashed back to 3 years ago. I had been 28, marrying David, a man I loved with everything I had. We didn't have Marcus's family money, and I was still building my business. When I had tentatively asked my parents if they could contribute to the catering, my mother had laughed in my face. "You're a wedding planner, Sienna," she had said then. "You can do it yourself for cheap. Why would we pay for a professional when you are one? It's redundant." They had shown up to my wedding with a $500 check and a silver-plated cake stand they'd clearly found on a clearance rack at a department store. I had planned my own wedding while working 3 other high-profile events. I had spent my wedding morning on the phone with a florist who had forgotten my bouquets, and I had walked down the aisle with dark circles under my eyes from exhaustion. My total budget had been $8,000. During the reception, while I was trying to breathe and enjoy my one day of happiness, my mother had leaned in and whispered, "The appetizers are a bit sparse, don't you think? It looks a little budget." Now, 3 years later, she was telling me that my sister, the golden child who had never worked a 40-hour week in her life and whose only job was being pretty for Instagram, was getting a $50,000 head start. And I was being drafted into unpaid, high-level labor to make sure my sister's real wedding didn't suffer the same budget fate mine did. "I'll have to check my calendar, Mom," I said, my voice tight and my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have 3 celebrity bookings for next spring. I'm not sure I can physically manage a 4th, especially one in Europe." "Check your heart, Sienna," my mother hissed, her tone shifting from fluttering to ice cold. "This is your sister's special day. Don't let your business greed and your jealousy get in the way of this family's reputation. We're finally going to have the real wedding we've always wanted to host. One we can be proud of. If you don't do this, don't bother coming home for Christmas." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the silence of my beautiful, hard-earned office, looking at the silver-plated cake stand that sat on my bookshelf, a mocking reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. I was the help. I was the one who worked so they could play. I was the one who built the stage so Claire could dance on it. I looked at my own wedding photo on my desk. David was looking at me with so much love, but I looked like a woman who was carrying the weight of the world. I hadn't realized then that my parents didn't see my career as a success to be celebrated. They saw it as a utility to be exploited. I picked up my phone and opened my contact list. I looked at the names: Alessandro, vineyard owner; Luca, caterer; Sophia, florist. These people were the best in the world. They were my friends. They would do anything for me because I had spent a decade doing everything for them. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to agree to plan the most perfect, most expensive, most extravagant wedding in the history of the Blake family. And I was going to do it with a precision that would make Martha Stewart weep. But I wasn't doing it for Claire, and I wasn't doing it for my mother. I was doing it because when you spend your life building houses of cards for people who treat you like the help, eventually, you realize you're the only one who knows which card to pull to make the whole thing scream as it hits the floor. To understand the cold, calculating weight of the decision I was about to make in Tuscany, you have to understand the ghosts that lived in my bank account. My mother's words on the phone, that Claire's wedding would be the real one, weren't just a slight. They were the final coat of paint on a masterpiece of exclusion that had been 3 years in the making. I looked at the silver-plated cake stand on my shelf. It was tarnished now, a cheap alloy that had begun to peel at the edges. That was my wedding gift. That was the sum total of my parents' investment in my future. 3 years ago, I sat at this very same desk, vibrating with the kind of excitement only a bride-to-be can feel. I had just gotten engaged to David. He wasn't an investment banker like Marcus. He was a high school history teacher with a heart made of gold and a retirement account that was mostly a hopeful suggestion. We were happy. We were deeply, quietly in love. And because I spent my life making other people's dreams come true, I allowed myself to dream, just for a second, that my family would want to make mine come true, too. I remember the Sunday brunch at my parents' house when I told them the news. I had brought a binder, not a professional one, but a personal one, filled with sketches of a small, intimate garden wedding. I had found a beautiful public park in Austin with a stone gazebo that cost next to nothing to permit. "Mom, Dad," I had said, my voice thick with hope. "David and I are getting married. I found this beautiful spot, and if we can just get a little help with the catering, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, I can do the rest myself." My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother, however, set her coffee cup down with a clink that sounded like a closing cell door. "Sienna, honestly," she had said, sighing, "you are a professional wedding planner. You have access to all the wholesale prices, the leftovers from other events, the favors. Why on earth would we throw money at a wedding when you can just manifest it? It would be a waste of our retirement savings. Besides, you're so independent. You've always been the one who didn't need us." That was the lie they used to justify their neglect. Sienna is strong. Sienna is successful. Sienna doesn't need a hand up. What they really meant was that I was a tool that had already been sharpened, so they didn't need to put any work into me. I planned that wedding in the cracks of my life. I was working 60-hour weeks for clients who demanded hand-painted invitations and imported peonies. Then I would come home at midnight to DIY my own centerpieces with spray-painted wine bottles and grocery store carnations. David tried to help, but he didn't know the industry. He didn't know that the florist I'd used for 5 years suddenly became unavailable for my date because my budget was too low to be worth her time. The day of my wedding was the most exhausting day of my life. I didn't wake up to a silk robe and mimosas. I woke up at 5:00 a.m. to drive to the flower market because I couldn't afford delivery. I spent the morning steaming my own dress and checking the weather radar every 6 minutes. When my parents arrived at the gazebo, they didn't come with a cash gift or a bottle of champagne. They came with complaints. "It's a bit humid out here, isn't it?" my mother had remarked as she sat on a folding chair I had rented for $2. "And Sienna, dear, these appetizers, are they just crackers and cheese? I thought with your connections, you'd at least have some shrimp cocktail." I stood there in my $600 off-the-rack dress, my feet aching, my heart breaking, and I realized then that I wasn't their daughter. I was their useful relative. I was the person they called when their car broke down or when they needed a discount on a gift, but I was never the person they celebrated. Claire, of course, had spent the entire afternoon of my wedding pouting, because the aesthetic of the park wasn't good for her Instagram feed. She had worn a white-adjacent sundress that bordered on bridal, and she had spent the ceremony texting Marcus, who she had just started dating. At the end of the night, my father handed me that $500 check and the cake stand. "There you go, kid. Don't spend it all in one place. You're lucky you have a career that lets you do this for cheap." I didn't cry then. I held David's hand and we danced to a Spotify playlist on a borrowed Bluetooth speaker, and I told myself that it was enough. I told myself that family was complicated, but they loved me in their own way. But now, 3 years later, the way they loved me was finally clear. They loved me like a piece of equipment. The $50,000 gift to Claire wasn't just money. It was a statement of value. They valued her happiness at 50 grand. They valued mine at a clearance rack cake stand. They were willing to bankrupt their retirement for Claire's Tuscan fantasy, but they expected me to donate $15,000 of my professional time and tens of thousands more in vendor favors to bridge the gap. I picked up the phone. I knew what I had to do. I had to play the part. I had to be the good sister for just a little while longer. I had to build the most spectacular, most expensive, most favor-laden wedding in the history of Tuscany. I called my mother back. "Mom," I said, my voice perfectly neutral, the voice I use for my most difficult celebrity clients. "I've thought about it. You're right. Family is everything. I'll do it. I'll plan Claire's wedding for free. I'll handle the villa, the catering, the photography, everything." "Oh, Sienna, I knew you'd come around," she chirped. "I told your father you just needed a little nudge to remember your priorities. We want the best, remember. Nothing budget this time." "I promise you, Mom," I said, looking at my reflection in the dark screen of my computer. "It will be a wedding no one will ever forget. I'm going to call in every favor I have." I hung up and opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keys as I began a new project folder. CLAIRE and MARCUS Tuscany. I began reaching out to my inner circle of vendors. These weren't just business associates. They were people whose children's christenings I had attended, people whose businesses I had saved during the 2020 lockdowns. "Alessandro," I typed in a WhatsApp message. "My sister is getting married. I need the vineyard for the first weekend in June. I know it's peak season, but I'm asking for a personal favor. Can you give us the family rate? Actually, can you do it for the cost of the cleaning fee, just for me?" The reply came back in minutes. "For you, Sienna, anything. The vineyard is yours. I will tell my staff it is a private event for the Blake family queen." "Luca," I messaged my favorite Michelin-starred caterer. "I need a 5-course tasting menu for 150. Tuscany, June. I need you to do this one at cost. I'll make sure your next 3 Austin contracts are at double your normal rate. Can you help me out?" "Sophia," I told my florist. "The lilies, the peonies, the archway. I need it to look like a dream. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm planning this as a gift for my sister. Can you work your magic for a friend price?" One by one, they all said yes. Not because they cared about Claire, they had never met her. They said yes because they respected me. They said yes because I was Sienna Blake, and my word was as good as gold in an industry built on smoke and mirrors. I was building a $200,000 wedding on a foundation of pure social credit. I was putting my entire reputation on the line, staking every ounce of goodwill I had earned over 12 years on this one event. My parents and Claire thought they were getting a free wedding because they were special. They didn't realize they were getting a free wedding because I was powerful. And they didn't realize that the power I used to build it was the exact same power I could use to dismantle it. As I booked my flight to Florence, I felt a strange, cold peace wash over me. For 3 years, I had carried the resentment of my own budget, wedding like a stone in my shoe. But as I watched the RSVPs start to roll in from Marcus's wealthy, judgmental family, I realized that the stone wasn't an obstacle anymore. It was a weapon. I was going to give Claire the real wedding my mother wanted. I was going to make it perfect. I was going to make it so beautiful it would make people ache. And then, I was going to wait for the moment they reminded me who I really was to them. Because I knew they would. Entitlement is a hungry beast. The more you feed it, the more it expects to eat. By the time February rolled around, my studio had been transformed into a war room for Claire's Tuscan fantasy. The walls were no longer covered in the diverse portfolios of my paying clients. They were plastered with floor plans of the Villa di Pietra, fabric swatches of Italian lace, and a minute-by-minute itinerary that would have made a military general sweat. The Rolodex of debt was now fully activated. In my world, a favor isn't just a nice gesture. It's an IOU written in blood. To get the vineyard for next to nothing, I had promised Alessandro that I would exclusively recommend his estate to my high-net-worth Austin clients for the next 3 years. To get Luca, the caterer, to provide a Michelin-level 5-course meal for the price of bread and water, I had spent 40 hours over Christmas ghostwriting his new business proposal, and securing him a meeting with a hotel magnate in Dallas. I was burning my social capital like jet fuel. Every yes I received from a vendor was a withdrawal from the bank of my own hard-earned reputation. I was becoming professionally overdrawn, all to ensure my sister could walk down an aisle paved with the favors I owed the world. And yet, in the family group chat, a digital space that had become my daily source of acid reflux, my name was rarely mentioned except in the form of a demand. Claire, Sienna, the florist says peonies might be out of season for the second week of June. Fix it. I'm not having filler flowers at my wedding. Mom, Sienna, Marcus's mother wants to know if the quartet can play some obscure 17th century Italian hymn. Make sure they learn it. We need to show them we have culture. Dad, Sienna, did you book the shuttle for the airport? Don't forget, David can help with the luggage when guests arrive. It'll save us on tipping the porters. I stared at that last message for a long time. They weren't just treating me like the help anymore. They were eyeing my husband as free labor, too. I looked at David, who was grading history papers on the couch, oblivious to the fact that my father had already assigned him a bellhop uniform in his mind. Is everything okay, C? David asked, noticing my white-knuckled grip on my phone. Fine, I lied, forced a smile, and went back to work. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I was trading our peace and my professional future for a sister who wouldn't even thank me for a cup of water if she were dying of thirst. The first major crack in the piece appeared during the final tasting in Austin, a month before we were set to fly to Florence. Since Luca was doing the wedding at cost, he had prepared a scaled-down version of the menu for my parents and Claire to approve. We sat in the private dining room of Luca's restaurant. The atmosphere was supposed to be celebratory, but the air felt heavy. Claire was already in bridezilla mode, her eyes darting around the room looking for something to criticize. Luca brought out the first course, a delicate truffle-infused risotto that smelled like heaven. It was a dish that would normally cost $60 a plate. Claire took one bite, made a face, and pushed the plate away. It's a bit earthy, isn't it? I was hoping for something more clean, like a lemon butter sauce. Luca, a man who had cooked for heads of state, looked at me, his eyes flashing with a mix of confusion and irritation. I had told him Claire had refined taste. I hadn't told him she had the palate of a toddler with a credit card. Claire, I said gently, trying to keep my voice in that professional, soothing register. Truffles are a staple of the region. This is a Michelin star recipe. It's what Marcus's family will expect from a high-end Italian wedding. I don't care what they expect, Sienna, Claire snapped, turning to our mother. Mom, tell her, this is my day. Why am I being forced to eat dirt-flavored rice just because Sienna thinks it's sophisticated? My mother patted Claire's hand, giving me that look, the one that said I was being difficult again. Now, Sienna, don't be a snob. If Claire wants lemon butter, surely your little friend can just change the recipe. It's not like we're paying him the full rate anyway, right? He should be happy for the exposure. The silence that followed was deafening. Luca didn't move. He just stared at my mother, then at me. I felt the heat rise in my neck. To a chef like Luca, exposure was the ultimate insult, especially when he was already losing money on the labor. Luca, I'm so sorry, I whispered, standing up to lead him into the kitchen. Behind the swinging doors, Luca turned to me. Sienna, I am doing this for you, only for you, but your family. They treat me like a servant at a drive-thru. They don't understand that the family discount is a privilege, not a right. I know, Luca. I know. Please just hang in there for me. I'll make it up to you, I promise. You already are making it up to them, Sienna, he said, his voice softening with pity. But who is making it up to you? I didn't have an answer. When I returned to the table, Claire was showing our mother a photo of a wedding gown that cost more than my first car. And Sienna, Claire said without looking up. "I've decided I want the photographer to do a pre-wedding shoot in Venice. We'll need to fly him out 2 days early. You can just tell him it's part of the package, right?" "Claire, the photographer is already giving us an $8,000 discount because he owes me a referral favor. Asking him for 2 extra days of travel and shooting is pushing it." "Oh, stop being so stingy with your favors, Sienna," my father chimed in, finally looking up from his wine. "You act like you're the one doing the work. All you're doing is making a few phone calls. It's not like you're out there picking the grapes yourself." That was the moment I felt something inside me finally shift. It wasn't a snap. It was more like a silent, tectonic movement. For years, I had believed that if I worked hard enough, if I was successful enough, if I provided enough value, they would eventually see me as an equal. But as I sat there watching them complain about a world-class meal they weren't paying for, I realized the truth. They didn't see the value because they didn't see me. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister who had built a brand from nothing. I was just a highly efficient concierge who happened to share their DNA. The planning continued, but my heart had left the building. I became a ghost in my own process, moving through the motions with a chilling precision. I booked the Venice shoot. I changed the menu to lemon butter. I smoothed over the ruffled feathers of the string quartet when Claire demanded they play "Pop Goes the Weasel" as a joke during the processional. I talked her out of that one, at least. Every time I felt my resolve weaken, every time I thought about just being the bigger person, I would look at the silver-plated cake stand. I would remember the $8,000 budget for my own wedding and the way they had looked at David like he was an intruder in their perfect family. By the time we boarded the flight to Florence, I was no longer a wedding planner. I was a ticking clock. We arrived at the Villa di Pietra in a flurry of expensive luggage and high-pitched excitement. The vineyard was stunning. The rolling hills of Tuscany bathed in a golden, late afternoon light that seemed to promise only beauty. Alessandro greeted us at the gates. He pulled me aside, his face grave. "Sienna, everything is ready. The staff is prepped. The favor is locked in. But I must tell you, your sister arrived an hour ago. She has already shouted at my head housekeeper because the towels weren't the right shade of eggshell." I looked at the villa, where I could hear Claire's voice echoing from a balcony. "Don't worry, Alessandro," I said, patting his arm. "She won't be shouting for much longer." I walked into the villa, my heels clicking on the ancient stone floor. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner, the moment the 150 elite guests would arrive, the moment my sister would stand up to give her toast. I knew Claire. I knew her better than anyone. I knew that the more she felt like a queen, the more she would feel the need to remind everyone who was wearing the crown and who was just carrying the train. I checked my phone. The group chat of all the vendors, the circle of trust, was active. They were all there in Tuscany, waiting for my signal. They were the invisible architecture of Claire's dream, and they were all tied to me by a single thread of loyalty. I went to my room, the small, cramped room near the kitchen that Claire had assigned me, and sat on the bed. I didn't unpack. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the real family laughing over expensive wine in the garden. The fuse was lit. All I needed was for Claire to do what she did best, show the world exactly who she was. The morning sun in Tuscany is unlike anything else in the world, a soft, honeyed glow that makes even the most cynical heart believe in fairy tales. But as I stood on the terrace of the Villa di Pietra at 6:00 a.m., my eyes burning from a lack of sleep, the beauty of the rolling vineyards felt like a mockery. To my family, this landscape was a backdrop for a photo op. To me, it was a logistical minefield that I was navigating entirely alone. The "can you just" year had reached its frantic, ugly crescendo. Over the last 12 months, that 3-word phrase had become the tether my family used to drag me back into the role of the sacrificial lamb. "Sienna, can you just call the airline and get Marcus's parents upgraded to first class for free? You have the connections. Sienna, can you just redesign the seating chart for the 10th time? Claire decided she doesn't like the way the cousins look next to the font on the name cards. Sienna, can you just skip your anniversary dinner with David? We need to go over the gift bag assembly, and you're the only one who does the bows correctly. Now, in Italy, the demands had transitioned from digital pestering to physical exhaustion. I spent the morning directing the rental crew as they unloaded 3 trucks of hand-carved Tuscan chairs. My mother walked out onto the lawn, wearing a silk caftan and holding a mimosa, looking at the workers with the detached curiosity of someone watching a nature documentary. "Sienna, dear," she called out, shielding her eyes. "Those chairs look a bit rustic, don't they? Can you just have the men polish the wood? I want them to have a high-gloss finish by the time the rehearsal dinner starts tonight." I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. "Mom, there are 150 chairs. They're vintage oak. You can't just polish them in 4 hours without a professional crew." "Oh, don't be so negative," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "You've always been so obsessed with the work part. Just find a way. That's what we aren't paying you for, right?" She laughed at her own joke and turned back toward the villa, leaving me standing in the dust. The disrespect was no longer subtle. It was the atmosphere we breathed. Claire was even worse. She spent the afternoon trailing me like a spoiled shadow, pointing out flaws in the $20,000 floral installation that Sophia, my florist, was currently assembling for free. "Sophia, honey," Claire said, leaning over a massive arrangement of white hydrangeas and rare peonies. "Can you just move these 3 inches to the left? And I think I want more of the expensive lilies in this one. It looks a little sparse." Sophia's hands, calloused from years of floral work, paused. She looked at me, her jaw tight. She had been working since 4:00 a.m. to ensure the flowers survived the Italian heat. She was doing this as a personal gift to me, costing her thousands in wholesale fees and labor. "Claire," I intervened, stepping between them. "Sophia is the best in the business. Let her do her job. The balance of the arrangement is perfect." Claire rolled her eyes, her voice loud enough for the entire crew to hear. "I forgot. Everything is perfect as long as it's Sienna's way. Just remember who the bride is, Sophia. My sister might be the boss in Austin, but here, she's just the one making sure I get what I want." She turned on her heel and strutted away, her designer sandals clicking on the stone path. Sophia looked at me, her eyes filling with a mixture of pity and fury. "Sienna," she whispered, "I am only here because you asked, but that girl, she treats us like we are furniture. She treats you like you are invisible." "I know," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Just one more day, Sophia, please." But the true, can you just moment, the one that finally began to erode the last of my guilt, happened during the room assignments. The Villa di Pietra had 22 luxury suites. Marcus's family occupied the east wing. My parents and Claire had the penthouse suites overlooking the valley. I went to find my luggage, expecting to be in one of the smaller guest rooms. Instead, I found my suitcases sitting in a narrow, dim corridor near the industrial kitchens. I found Claire in the main salon, showing off her custom-made silk robes to her bridesmaids. "Claire," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage, "my bags are in the staff quarters." "Oh, right," Claire said, not even looking up from a bottle of champagne. "I had to move you. Marcus's college friends decided to bring extra dates at the last minute, and obviously they need the guest rooms. I figured since you'll be up half the night working anyway, you wouldn't mind being near the kitchen. It's practical, really. You can just check on the breakfast prep easily from there." My mother nodded in agreement. "It makes sense, Sienna. You're here to work after all. David can stay there too. It'll be like a little adventure for you both." David, my husband, who had spent his own money on a flight to Italy just to support me, Was being told he had to sleep in a twin bed in a room that smelled of garlic and floor wax so that Marcus's frat brothers could have a view of the sunset. David is a guest, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. He is not staff. Sienna, don't be a buzzkill, Claire groaned. You're always so sensitive about your status. Can't you just be a team player for once? It's my wedding, my one special day. Why are you trying to ruin it by complaining about a room? I looked at my mother. She was busy adjusting a lace doily on a side table, refusing to meet my eyes. My father was in the corner, laughing with Marcus about a golf course. I was the person who had spent 3 years of my life and every ounce of my professional reputation to build this moment for them, and they had literally put me in the servants' quarters. I walked out of the room without saying another word. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went out to the garden, past the $10,000 string quartet that was currently practicing the 17th century hymns my mother had demanded, and I sat on a stone bench hidden by a row of lemon trees. I pulled out my phone. I opened the group chat labeled Tuscany Crew. It contained the vineyard owner, the caterer, the photographer, the florist, and the musicians. I looked at the messages they had been sending me all day. Luca, Sienna, the mother just told my sous chef he looks disheveled. We are losing patience. Alessandro, the bride's father tried to tell me I don't know how to store my own wine. Sienna, my friend, this is getting difficult. They were all waiting for a reason to stay. They were all there for me, and only for me. I realized then that I was the only thing standing between my family and total social humiliation. I was the dam holding back a flood of consequences they had spent a lifetime earning. I looked at the villa, the lights flickering in the windows, the sound of Marcus's friends laughing, the smell of the Michelin star food Luca was preparing for the rehearsal dinner. It was a beautiful, expensive lie. I was done being the architect of their perfection. I was ready to be the architect of their reality. 1 more hour, I whispered to the lemon trees. Just wait for the toast. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and headed back toward the villa. It was time for the rehearsal dinner. It was time for Claire to take the stage. And it was time for me to decide if I was going to keep holding the dam or if I was finally going to let it break. The rehearsal dinner was set on the long, stone veranda of the Villa di Pietra, overlooking a valley that looked like it had been painted by a Renaissance master. Under my direction, 100 flickering pillar candles had been placed in antique hurricane lamps, casting a warm, golden glow over the 3 long imperial tables. The scent of rosemary and roasting lamb drifted from Luca's kitchen, and the $10,000 string quartet played a soft, haunting Vivaldi concerto that echoed off the ancient walls. To any of the 150 guests, it was the pinnacle of elegance. To Marcus's parents, the old money elite from Connecticut, it was proof that their son was marrying into a family of equal standing and taste. They had no idea that every single element of this evening, from the vintage lace runners to the specific vintage of the Brunello being poured, was a gift from my friends to me. I moved through the crowd in my charcoal cocktail dress, a ghost in the machinery. I was checking the wine levels, whispering timing cues to the waitstaff, and ensuring the lighting stayed perfect as the sun dipped below the horizon. I hadn't eaten in 12 hours. My feet were throbbing in my heels, and the small, windowless room near the kitchen was waiting for me at the end of the night. Everything looks acceptable, Sienna, my mother whispered as I passed her. She didn't look at me. She was too busy scanning the room to see if Marcus's mother was impressed. Though I noticed a smudge on one of the water glasses at table 3. Can you just handle that before the main course? I'll get right on that, Mom, I said, my voice as flat as the Tuscan plains. At the head table, Claire was radiant. She was wearing a white silk slip dress that cost more than David's car, her hair coiffed into effortless waves. She was holding court, regaling Marcus's friends with stories of how stressful it had been to plan a destination wedding. I mean, the logistics are just a nightmare, Claire said, laughing as she tossed her head back. I've had to stay on top of everything. You know how it is. If you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. Or, at least, stay on top of the people doing it for you. Marcus leaned over and kissed her cheek. You've done an incredible job, babe. My parents are blown away. I stood by the shadows of the stone pillars, watching. I saw Luca standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his white chef's coat stained with the sweat of a man who had been cooking for 14 hours. He caught my eye and gave a subtle shake of his head. He was done. He was only staying because I was still there. Then the clinking of glass against silver silenced the room. Claire stood up, her face flushed with champagne and triumph. It was time for the toast. I want to thank everyone for flying all the way to Italy to celebrate Marcus and me, Claire began, her voice projecting perfectly across the veranda. This past year has been a journey, seeing this all come together. It's a dream come true. She looked over at our parents, her eyes shimmering with performative tears. Mom, Dad, thank you for your incredible generosity. Without your support and that amazing $50,000 head start, we wouldn't be standing here in this villa tonight. You've always known how to make me feel like a princess. My father beamed, puffing out his chest. My mother wiped a corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief. And of course, Claire continued, her tone shifting slightly. She scanned the room until she found me standing near the service entrance. I have to mention my sister, Sienna. She's been our little secret weapon. A few people turned to look at me. I felt the heat of the candles suddenly feel like a fever. Sienna is a wedding planner back in Austin, as some of you know, Claire said, a playful, condescending smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. And I have to say, she's been so helpful. It's been like having my very own personal concierge on speed dial. Seriously, guys, good help is so hard to find these days, isn't it? A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It wasn't a kind laughter. It was the laughter of people who viewed service as a birthright. I told her she didn't need to dress up tonight, Claire added, winking at her bridesmaids. I was worried she'd get confused and start trying to serve the appetizers. But in all seriousness, Sienna isn't really here as a guest. She's more like the staff. No offense, see, we just couldn't have done this without our favorite little employee. The laughter was louder this time. My mother joined in, a delicate, tinkling sound. My father chuckled, nodding to Marcus's father as if to say, see, we know how to keep her in her place. I stood perfectly still. I looked at David, who was sitting at the very end of the furthest table. He had half risen from his seat, his face dark with fury, his eyes locked on mine, waiting for me to give him the word to shut the whole thing down. But I didn't look at David. I looked at Claire. She was grinning at me, her hand raised in a mock salute, waiting for me to do what I always did. Smile, nod, and go back to work. She expected me to swallow the insult for the sake of family. She expected me to prioritize her special day over my own basic humanity. In that moment, the 3 years of resentment, the cake stand, the $8,000 wedding, the twin bed in the kitchen corridor, the can you just demands, all of it condensed into a single, cold point of clarity. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was a resource, and a resource has no obligation to be loyal to those who waste it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the dim light of the veranda. I opened the Tuscany crew group chat. Every single person who made this night possible was on that thread. They were all watching, listening, and waiting. I typed 8 words. I'm officially off the clock. You should be too. I hit send. I felt a strange, light sensation in my chest, as if a heavy cloak had finally slipped off my shoulders. I looked up and saw Luca in the kitchen doorway. He looked at his phone, then looked at me. He gave a sharp, solemn nod. He untied his apron and dropped it on the floor. Across the garden, I saw Sophia, who had been adjusting a centerpiece near the bar. She checked her phone, looked at Claire, and then walked straight to her van. The string quartet, mid-crescendo, suddenly stopped. The cellist stood up, packed his bow, and walked away without a word to the stunned guests. I walked toward the head table. The laughter was dying down now, replaced by a confused murmur as the music vanished, and the service staff began to disappear into the night. "Sienna," Claire asked, her smile faltering. "What's going on? Why did the music stop?" I reached the table and looked my sister directly in the eye. I didn't look like an employee anymore. I looked like the woman who owned the room. "You're right, Claire," I said, my voice clear and steady enough to carry to the back row. "Good help is hard to find, and as of right now, you've officially lost yours." I turned and walked toward David. I didn't look back at my mother's gasping mouth or my father's rising shout. I just took my husband's hand and started walking toward the gates. Behind me, the golden glow of the candles was the only thing left of the dream. The nightmare was just beginning. The silence that followed the music was more deafening than the laughter had been. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating air that precedes a landslide. As I walked down the stone veranda with David's hand firmly in mine, I could feel the eyes of 150 elite guests boring into my back. Behind me, the golden illusion of the wedding of the century was already beginning to fray at the edges. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't stop to argue. I had spent 12 years perfecting the art of the exit, and this was my masterpiece. We reached the gravel driveway just as the first wave of the collapse hit. I saw Alessandro, the vineyard owner, standing by the heavy oak gates. He was holding his phone, the glow reflecting in his dark eyes. He had seen my text. He had also seen Claire's performance from the shadows of the tasting room. "Sienna," he said, his voice a low rumble of Italian authority. "I have the keys to the villa. I was going to leave them with your father for the week, but after what that girl said, after how she spoke to my staff," he trailed off, looking at the clock-out message on his screen. "My grandmother always said, never trust a person who treats the baker like a beggar. The gates will be locked at noon tomorrow, Sienna. I am honoring your request. They have 16 hours to find a new world." "Thank you, Alessandro," I whispered. Sienna, get back here this instant." My father's voice shattered the night. He was jogging down the stone steps, his face a mottled shade of purple that matched the expensive Merlot he'd been guzzling. My mother followed behind him, clutching her silk caftan, her eyes wide with a mix of panic and fury. I stopped and turned. I didn't feel the old, familiar sting of his disapproval. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical curiosity. "What is the meaning of this?" my father roared, stopping a few feet away. "The band just walked out. The waiters are clearing their lockers. Luca told me he's out of ingredients for the wedding breakfast. Fix it, now." "I can't fix it, Dad," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I'm staff, remember, and the staff just quit." "Don't you dare use that tone with me," my mother hissed, her voice trembling. "Claire was making a joke. It was a toast, Sienna, a light-hearted toast to lighten the mood. You are being incredibly selfish. Do you have any idea how this looks to Marcus's parents? They think we're a circus." "No, Mom," I countered. "They think you are a circus. They just watched you humiliate the woman who built this entire event from nothing. They watched you treat a professional with 12 years of experience like a kitchen maid. Marcus's family might be old money, but they know one thing. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing keeping the lights on." "Fix it, Sienna," my father demanded, stepping closer. "I am your father. I am telling you to call those people back. I don't care what it costs." "That's the problem, Dad," I said, a small, sharp smile touching my lips. "It doesn't cost anything. That's why you can't buy them back. They aren't here for your money. They're here for me. And since I'm no longer really family, I don't see why I should keep using my reputation to subsidize your ego." I turned back to David, who was looking at my parents with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "Let's go, David. We have a hotel room in the village, a real one, with a window." As we walked toward our rental car, the first of the supply trucks began to roll past us. It was Sophia, the florist. I could see the back of her van filled with the $20,000 worth of rare peonies and white lilies she had spent all day meticulously arranging. She wasn't just leaving, she was taking the beauty with her. I sat in the passenger seat of the car and buckled my seatbelt. I didn't look at the villa. I didn't look at the lights. I just looked at my phone. The Tuscany crew group chat was buzzing with one final message from Luca. "The kitchen is dark, Sienna. The truffles are back in the cooler. We are gone." The dam hadn't just broken. The water was already rising. While David and I drove down the winding cypress-lined road toward the village, the Villa di Pietra was undergoing a transformation that no amount of $50,000 cash gifts could prevent. It was the sound of a dream being dismantled in real time. Back at the veranda, the 150 guests, clutching half-empty wine glasses, watched in stunned silence as the invisible infrastructure of the evening evaporated. The 90-minute implosion didn't happen with a bang. It happened with the methodical clicking of equipment cases and the retreating hum of diesel engines. It started at the bar. The mixologists, 3 of Florence's finest who had agreed to work the event as a favor to my beverage consultant in Austin, didn't just stop serving. They took the premium spirits with them. They were independent contractors, and their contract was with me, not the Blake family. As Marcus's wealthy college friends approached for another round of high-end gin, they found only empty crystal decanters and a note from the head bartender. Service terminated. Inside the villa, the chaos was more personal. My mother had cornered Alessandro in the foyer, her voice reaching a pitch that shattered the refined image she had spent decades cultivating. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, her silk kaftan fluttering as she gestured wildly. "We have a contract. This is a world-class estate." Alessandro, standing tall with the calm dignity of a man whose family had owned that land since the Medici era, checked his watch. "Signora, you do not have a contract with me. Sienna Blake has a handshake with me. In Tuscany, a handshake from a woman of her word is worth more than a mountain of your paper. She told my staff to clock out. Therefore, they are clocking out. You have until noon tomorrow to vacate the property. After that, the security system will be armed and the gates will be locked." He didn't wait for her to respond. He simply turned and walked into his private study, the heavy oak door closing with a finality that echoed through the marble hallway. Meanwhile, Claire was experiencing her own brand of hell in the bridal suite. She had been on her phone for 45 minutes, her face streaked with mascara, trying to call every photographer in the Florence region. "I don't care what the cost is," she screamed into the receiver. "I need a professional shoot starting at 8:00 a.m. What do you mean you're booked? What do you mean you've heard about the Tuscany blacklisting?" She didn't understand the speed of the industry. The wedding world is a small, tight-knit village. By the time I had reached my hotel in the village, every high-end vendor within a 100-mile radius knew that the Blake wedding was a toxic site. My text hadn't just been an instruction to my crew. It had been a flare sent up into the night sky, warning every other professional to stay away. The photographer who owed me 3 referrals, he hadn't just left. He had already formatted the memory cards from the rehearsal dinner. The photos of Claire looking radiant in her silk slip dress, deleted. The shots of Marcus's parents looking impressed by the Blake taste, gone. The most devastating blow, however, came from the kitchen. Luca and his team had packed the 5-course Michelin star meal into refrigerated vans in under 20 minutes. The rare truffles, the hand-rolled pasta, the Wagyu beef, it was all gone. When Marcus's father wandered into the kitchen to ask about the delayed dessert course, He found a group of confused bridesmaids trying to figure out how to operate an industrial Italian espresso machine. The wedding of the century was now a $200,000 shell. I sat on the balcony of our modest hotel room, listening to the distant bells of the village church. David brought me a glass of local wine, real wine, paid for with our own money. "The phone hasn't stopped," David said, nodding toward my device on the nightstand. I looked at the screen. 42 missed calls from my mother, 36 from Claire, 11 from my father, and then a single text from Marcus's father. "Sienna, I've just seen the staff leaving. I think I'm beginning to understand the help comment now. Please call me when you can. We need to talk about what kind of family my son is actually marrying into." The implosion was complete. My family had wanted a wedding that made a statement. They finally got one. They just didn't realize the statement was going to be written by the woman they thought they could afford to lose. The morning sun that rose over Tuscany the next day didn't bring the warmth of a fairy tale. It brought the cold, clinical light of a crime scene. From my balcony in the village, I watched the distant silhouette of the Villa di Pietra. Even from 3 miles away, the absence of the massive white floral archway, which Sophia had dismantled under the cover of night, was visible. The hilltop looked naked, stripped of the borrowed prestige I had spent a year draping over it. By 9:00 a.m., the frantic energy of the family had shifted from rage to a desperate, clawing survivalism. The wedding of the century was no longer about luxury. It was about avoiding a total social massacre in front of Marcus's blue-blooded relatives. I was finishing a quiet breakfast of crusty bread and bitter espresso when the final wave of messages arrived. They weren't demands anymore. They were whimpers. "Mom, Sienna, please. Marcus's parents are asking why there is no breakfast service. The guests are hungry. Claire is hysterical. We'll pay. Just tell us who to call." I didn't reply. I knew who they had called. They had tried to hire the village trattoria, only to find that Alessandro had already informed the locals that the Americans at the villa were not to be serviced. In a region where reputation is the only currency that doesn't devalue, my family was bankrupt. The evacuation of the villa was, by all accounts, a comedy of errors. Without the shuttle buses I had coordinated, 150 guests, dressed in their Italian linens and designer shades, had to call local taxis that arrived one by one, trailing dust and confusion. My father, the man who had bragged about a $50,000 gift, was seen lugging 3 of Claire's massive suitcases down the gravel drive because the staff he had mocked were currently enjoying a paid day off at the beach. The destination wedding had officially moved. The new venue, a sterile, 3-star budget hotel near the local train station. David and I drove past it on our way out of town. It was a brutalist concrete box with a flickering neon sign and a lobby that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. In the parking lot, I saw Marcus's father. He was standing by his rental car, his arms crossed, looking at the hotel with an expression of profound, quiet horror. He wasn't just disappointed. He was reevaluating his son's entire future. Inside the hotel's conference suite, a windowless room with beige carpet and plastic chairs, the ceremony finally took place. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi. Instead, Claire walked down a makeshift aisle to the tinny sound of a wedding march playing from a bridesmaid's iPhone. The flowers weren't Sophia's hand-picked peonies. They were 3 wilted bouquets my father had managed to buy from a grocery store stall at the train station, held together with Scotch tape and desperation. Claire's $10,000 dress looked absurd in the fluorescent light, the hem already stained with the dust of the driveway she'd had to walk down herself. The reception followed in the hotel's restaurant, which was currently serving a lunch special of lukewarm lasagna to a group of German backpackers at the next table. "Is this it?" I heard a bridesmaid whisper as a waiter in a stained apron set down a tray of house red wine. I thought this was supposed to be a Martha Stewart event. Sienna ruined it, my mother's voice hissed from the head table. She was sitting next to Marcus's mother, who was staring at her plate of limp salad as if it were a biohazard. She's always been jealous of Claire. She sabotaged us out of pure spite. But Marcus's mother didn't nod in agreement. She looked at my mother, her gaze sharp and discerning. Jealousy? From what I saw last night, your daughter Sienna provided everything. Your other daughter simply provided the insults. I've never seen someone work so hard to be treated so poorly. The silence that followed was the sound of the Blake family's social, standing in the Connecticut elite being permanently erased. As the courthouse official pronounced them man and wife in a language Claire didn't understand, there was no cheer. There was only the sound of 150 guests looking at their watches, wondering how soon they could catch the next flight back to New York. Claire's marriage had started, not with a sunset in a vineyard, but with a plastic cup of cheap wine in a room without windows. She had wanted to be a queen, but she had forgotten that a queen is nothing without the people who build her throne. I turned to David and started the car. Ready to go. Where to? He asked, smiling. Anywhere that doesn't have a seating chart, I said. Behind us, the budget hotel faded into the distance. The help was officially gone, and for the first time in 3 years, I could finally breathe. By the time David and I landed back in Austin, the Italian sun was a distant memory, but the fire I had lit in Tuscany was just beginning to catch a global wind. I had kept my phone on airplane mode for the duration of the flight, a self-imposed sanctuary from the digital shrapnel I knew was waiting for me. When I finally toggled the switch in the taxi line at Bergstrom International, the device vibrated so violently in my hand it felt like it had a heartbeat. Hundreds of notifications flooded the screen, messages from old college friends, emails from industry peers, and the usual toxic slurry from the family group chat. But it was a notification from Facebook that stopped me in my tracks. My Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, and the only person in the family who had ever dared to call my parents out on their favoritism, had posted. Robert was a retired high school principal with a no-nonsense moral compass and a following of nearly 5,000 people in our hometown and the wider wedding industry circle. He hadn't just posted a status update, he had posted a manifesto. Underneath a grainy photo he'd snapped of me standing alone by the service entrance just minutes before the help toast, he wrote, "I just returned from Italy, and I am disgusted. I watched my niece, Sienna Blake, spend a year of her life and thousands of dollars of her own professional capital to build a dream for a sister who doesn't deserve her. I sat there and listened as her own family called her the help and staff in front of 150 guests. They took her labor, her favors, and her dignity, and then they laughed at her. Sienna didn't ruin a wedding. She simply stopped being exploited. It's time we stop calling this family duty and start calling it what it is, emotional and professional theft. Proud of you, Sienna. You finally clocked out." The post had already been shared 45,000 times. By the time I reached our front door, it was at 200,000. By the next morning, it had hit 2.3 million views. The wedding planner's revenge had become the internet's favorite brand of justice. My inbox was no longer a war zone of family guilt. It was a cathedral of solidarity. Thousands of people, florists, photographers, graphic designers, and even stay-at-home moms, began sharing their own "can you just" stories. The hashtag #ClockedOut began trending on X, and the wedding industry rallied around me with a ferocity that brought me to tears. Vendors I had never even met were posting videos. "We know what Sienna did. We know the favors she called in. For a family to treat a Martha Stewart-level pro like a servant is insanity. Blacklist the Blakes." But the most satisfying fallout wasn't the public support. It was the private destruction of the image my mother had sacrificed me to build. While the internet was busy canonizing me as a hero of the working class, Marcus's family, the old money elite my parents so desperately wanted to impress, were doing their own damage control. A leaked email from Marcus's father to my father made its way to me via Uncle Robert. It was short, sharp, and devastating. Arthur, the behavior we witnessed in Italy was not just embarrassing. It was revealing. My wife and I have spent 40 years building a reputation for integrity and class. To be associated with people who treat their own daughter with such public cruelty is a liability we cannot afford. Marcus and Claire are married now, but do not expect us to facilitate any social or professional introductions for your family in the future. We are keeping our distance. My parents had spent $50,000 and my entire reputation to buy a seat at the elite table, and within 90 minutes, they had been permanently uninvited. The viral post also reached the ears of the editorial board at the magazines that had featured me. Instead of being canceled for walking out, I was approached by 3 different publications for a feature on professional boundaries in the creative industry. My business, which I feared might suffer from the drama, saw a 400% increase in inquiries. People didn't want a planner who was a doormat. They wanted the woman with the ice water in her veins who knew her worth. 2 days after our return, my mother finally sent a message that wasn't a scream. "Mom, Sienna, the neighbors are seeing the posts. People at the club are whispering. Your father's business partners are asking questions. Please tell your uncle to take it down. You've had your fun. You've humiliated us. Isn't that enough?" I sat on my porch, looking out at the Texas sunset, feeling the weight of the silver-plated cake stand finally lift. "Sienna, humiliation is just the truth finally getting a voice, Mom. I didn't write the story. I just stopped being the ghostwriter." The dust of the internet storm had begun to settle, but the atmosphere in my parents' living room was still thick with the scent of stagnant resentment. They had summoned me for a family meeting to discuss the damage I had caused. For the first time in my life, I didn't arrive with a peace offering or a binder of solutions. I arrived with a single sheet of paper. My father sat in his leather armchair, looking aged and diminished. My mother paced the Persian rug, her eyes red-rimmed. Claire was there, too, sitting on the sofa with Marcus. She looked different. The Tuscan glow had been replaced by a sharp, bitter edge. They hadn't gone on a honeymoon. Marcus's parents had reportedly frozen his trust fund until things cooled down. "You've had your pound of flesh, Sienna," my father said, his voice gravelly. "The post is everywhere. Claire can't even go to the grocery store without someone whispering. Are you satisfied?" "I'm not looking for satisfaction, Dad," I said, placing the paper on the coffee table. "I'm looking for a closing of the books." They all leaned in, expecting a letter of apology. Instead, they saw a professional invoice. It was a line-item breakdown of the last year. Professional management fee, destination wedding, $25,000. Site visit travel and expenses, $6,400. Vendor favor valuations, market rate delta, $42,000. Emergency on-site logistics, $5,000. Total gift value, $78,400. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is what I gave you," I said quietly. "I didn't give you help. I gave you $78,000 of my life, my talent, and my professional soul. You treated it like it was worth less than a cake stand. You didn't just exploit my work. You tried to erase the fact that it was work at all." "We're family," my mother burst out, her voice cracking. "You don't bill family." "You're right," I replied, standing up. "You don't bill family, but you also don't call family, the staff, to impress strangers. You don't put family in the servants' quarters while strangers sleep in the suites. You treated me like a vendor, so I'm showing you what that vendor costs. Consider the invoice paid in full by the bridge I burned in Tuscany. We're even." I looked at Claire. For a second, I expected her to scream. Instead, she just stared at the invoice, her lip trembling. For the first time, she saw the sheer scale of the machine I had built for her, and exactly how much power I had held while she was busy mocking me. Sienna, Marcus spoke up, his voice quiet. My father. He's talking about an annulment. He says the optics of the Blake family are too high risk for their firm. I looked at him, then at my sister. The golden child was finally realizing that without the stage I built, she was just a girl in an expensive dress standing in a dark room. I can't fix your optics, Marcus, I said. I'm officially retired from the business of making people look better than they actually are. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I went home to David, who had ordered Thai food and was waiting with a movie queued up. We sat on our budget sofa in our modest house, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't check my email. I didn't worry about a centerpiece. I was just Sienna. The justice was earned. I had my reputation, my business was thriving with clients who actually respected my craft, and I had reclaimed my time. But as I leaned my head on David's shoulder, a lingering question drifted through my mind, one that no invoice could ever settle. If I had never been successful, if I hadn't been useful to them, would they have ever called me at all? I closed my eyes, letting the question hang in the quiet of our home. I had my answer for the future, even if the past was a puzzle I'd never solve. But later that night, as I was deleting the Tuscan folder from my laptop, a new email notification popped up. It wasn't from a client. It was from a private investigator in Florence, an old contact of Alessandro S. The subject line was, "The empty casket." The body of the email was just one sentence. Sienna, I was clearing the records at the villa as you asked. You were right. The guest list Marcus's father provided wasn't just for a wedding. There are 3 names on here that don't exist, and they weren't there to watch a ceremony. I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. I had dismantled the wedding, but it seemed I had accidentally pulled a thread on something much darker involving Marcus's elite family. I looked at David, then back at the screen. I had my peace. I had my revenge. But as my cursor hovered over the reply button, I realized that some stories don't end when the music stops. Sometimes, the help sees things they weren't meant to see. And once you know how to pull a thread, it's very hard to stop. I closed the laptop, for now,